Okay, for today's video we're going to backtrack a little bit and see if we can catch up from the place where we were to where we need to be by the end of today. So if we go way back to 2 Kings 10, and this is the transition in the northern kingdom from Ahab. You remember Omri's dynasty that goes through Ahab and his various sons, and they are going to be taken over by Jehu. So it's a pretty violent chapter. You may remember it. Jehu kills everybody. Jezebel's eaten by the dogs. He kills the 70 sons. He kills the kings in Judah because they're related at this point. That's when Athaliah will take over in Judah, and she'll be killed, and the younger son will take over, and so on. So Jehu is a fairly violent guy, although he's trying to do all of this for the Lord, and he talks about seeing his zeal for the Lord, and he destroys the priest of Baal and the house of Baal. He brings forth their images and burns them, and so on. And he does a bunch of that kind of thing. He doesn't stop the worship of the calves in the northern and southern ends of the kingdom in Dan and Bethel. None of the kings of the north do that. But other than that, and of course the writers from the south are always going to say then of course he was nothing but terrible. But other than that, actually, he seems to really try and do what the Lord would have him do, and the Lord commends him for this. But the problem he will have is that Hazael from Syria will continue to gain ground over them. Again, after Solomon and David have controlled these folks because of the weakness of the two kingdoms in that alliance made by the southern kingdom with the Syrians in the north, the Syrians are going to continue to fight against these guys. And so Hazael continues to gain more and more control over them. About this time then, we're going to have the Assyrian. Now that's different than Syria, the Assyrian Empire. So let me show you some maps. Alright, so here we have Judah and Samaria, and just north of there, Syria with Damascus. Syria is right here. Alright, now Assyria, as we've said before, is based out of Ashur and Nineveh. They're based over here. Their empire starts here, and then it moves this way, and always they're moving down towards Egypt, and these guys are caught in between. So enter Assyria. They are now becoming large, and they're expanding this way. So Jehu, apparently, we don't get this in the Bible, we piece it together from a few other little things. Jehu will seek help from Assyria in controlling Syria, who is his northern enemy. And so he seems to voluntarily become a vassal to Assyria, seeking their help. And we know this from this particular little picture where you have the king of Assyria accepting tribute from Jehu. So this is Jehu. It's the only contemporary picture I know of anyone in the Bible, meaning a picture drawn of someone in the Bible by someone from that time period who would have seen and known him. This is called the Black Obelisk. It's created while Jehu is still alive. It's for Shalmaneser III, who talks about Jehu paying him tribute of silver and gold and so on, and you see him bowing down, acknowledge him. Jehu is still king, so he is the king of kings. That's how the Assyrian kings stylize themselves, as they take over other kings and have them rule underneath them. He's the king of kings, and that's a phrase that will be borrowed by the Savior later. But you see, then we have these Israelites coming to pay tribute to him. This is when Assyria first starts to gain dominance over Israel, and we can't really tell exactly when they gain full dominance, but sometime after this they gain really full dominance over Israel, and they expect a regular tribute of wealth and of people, servants and people to serve in the military. And anytime that tribute is withheld, it's viewed as rebellion, and that is the relationship that will spell the end for ancient Israel. Alright, so to really try and cement this in your mind, we're going to go quickly through the whole history of the northern kingdom. You remember Jeroboam is the one who sets up the idols and the golden calves and the altars in the northern and southern ends of the kingdom at Bethel and Dan. His son Nadab takes the throne very briefly, and then is killed by Baasha, who rules, but his son is not able to succeed him because he is killed by Zimri, who is in turn killed by Omri. They're the kind of co-generals, and Omri kills him and is powerful and rules for a long time. His son Ahab is powerful, rules for a long time, has contests with Elijah and Elisha and so on. Then we have his son Ahaziah, who successfully rules, but his son Jehoram is killed by Jehu. That's what we just talked about in that last video, is the violence of Jehu. Jehu will then establish a strong and successful dynasty. He's promised that by God because of his zeal for getting rid of the worship of Baal and trying to fulfill the word of the Lord and so on. And most of the violence he engages in, he's intentionally trying to fulfill the prophecies of God against this wicked group. So his son Jehoahaz and his son Jehoash, or also known as Joash, that's short for Jehoash, they reign after him, fairly decent, prosperous reigns, though they follow in idolatry and so on. And then you get Jeroboam II, who reigns, who seems to be a very righteous king. Prosperous reign, lots of good things happen for Jeroboam II. So that kind of gets us up to the end of the stability of the kingdom. You have these two fairly stable dynasties in Israel. They're the only ones that are ever a dynasty. No one else ever has a father successfully succeed a son succeed a father. They're killed very quickly. But after Jeroboam, that seems to end. What happens is his son Zechariah rises to the throne. And by the way, this is in the PowerPoint. We're going to try and not cover it in class because we're covering it here in the video, giving us time to talk about more important things in class. So his son Zechariah assumes the throne, but he's only on the throne for 6 months when he's killed by Shallum, who is only on the throne for 1 month when he is killed by Menachem. All right, this is on the PowerPoint. Again, we're not going to do it in class, so I just want you to know this, though. Menachem is vicious as he takes the throne, even more so than Jehu in some ways. He wants to keep the throne, but he's losing land to Syria, so he also is going to turn to Assyria, who at this point is counting on them as a vassal anyway. So Tiglath-Pileser III is the way we call him from the Assyrian sources. They call him Pul, which is short for Pileser. He pays a huge tribute to Tiglath-Pileser III. So that, again, we can see here that the Assyrians are coming in this way and controlling this area now. So their empire has grown to this extent that's in the green at this point. So it seems worth it for a moment to talk about the Assyrian war and tribute tactics. The Assyrians, very, very powerful empire, the most powerful up to that time, and this is what their kings looked like. They ruled this empire by basically fear. They would conquer an area, and then they wouldn't leave a presence. They didn't leave any representatives or anything in the area. They let the kings still be kings, but the kings had to send tribute back to the Assyrians, regularly sending wealth, exotic animals they especially liked, of course lots of foodstuffs and gold and silver and whatever else. They also had to send men that would work to build their walls. These are the walls of Nineveh here. They would work to build their construction projects, the roads that they built, and be servants, but especially people who would serve in their army. If you rebelled against them, they were brutal, hoping to just fully intimidate you so that no one would rebel again. And they would bring evidence at the next city that was rebelling of all of the vicious things that they had done before. So here's their army, very effective army, and then they love to impale people, flay people alive, flay them where they are impaled, cut their hands and arms off, their hands and feet off. I mean, they would do all of this to intimidate people so that they would never rebel against them, and they do it in front of their friends and so on. A brutal, brutal regime that kept this going. Now that we know how brutal the Assyrians are, let's return to our story. We're in 2 Kings 15 now. And what we're going to see here, this is when we have Azariah reigning, and then Shallum, and finally we get Menachem, who is where we were at last. And Menachem, as we said, turns to Assyria, and part of this is because the Assyrians were coming against them. All right, so Pul, or Tiglath-Pileser III, comes against them. I think he's also needing help with Syria, and he wants 1,000 talents of silver and so on. So Menachem gets the money from Israel, and he avoids being plundered and destroyed by the Assyrians as a result of just paying them their tribute. Then he dies, and Pekahiah, his son, reigns in his stead, but he only reigns for 2 years, and then he is killed by a guy named Pekah. Pekah is the son of Remaliah, all right, and you're going to hear about him from Isaiah as well, because what happens is that Pekah is going to ally himself with Rezin of Syria to rebel against Assyria. So they regularly owe Assyria tribute. The Israelites don't really like this. Some of them say, okay, it's still the wisest course. Others want to rebel against them. Pekah is part of the group that is going to rebel against him, but he is going to rely on his allies to try and defeat Assyria. And he thinks if he can get Syria in the north and Judah in the south, and perhaps even the Egyptians to help them, that they will have success. So he gets Syria, Rezin in Syria, and Pekah are willing to do this. Judah is not so sure, so they start talking about killing off the king of Judah and putting someone on the throne who would be willing to help them, and that's going to happen and be addressed by Isaiah. So you'll understand that better when we get to Isaiah. In any case, you've got Pekah here, who is rebelling against Assyria, and this is going to bring, it's really the beginning of the end. It's going to bring about many of the events that will result in the destruction of Israel, and we'll cover some of that in the PowerPoints in class to kind of cement this together. But I wanted to show you a couple of pictures and some maps and so on. So I have made it so I can't pause this. All right, sorry about that. Took me a minute. The little control bar disappeared. I had to find it again. Anyway, the Assyrians then are going to come down and come along this way, and they're going to first stop and deal with the Syrians. So the Assyrians will deal with the Syrians based in this area, especially out of Damascus. So you can see here, this is what we call the Golan Heights. These are the shorter heights. These are the higher heights, but all this is the Golan Heights, and it's the division between Syria and Israel today and in ancient times, although right now Israel has taken over these parts, modern-day Israel. In any case, Tiglath-Pileser III will first come here and deal with the Assyrians, or no, the Syrians. The Assyrians, Tiglath-Pileser III, will deal with the Syrians here, and then he will march down. And of course, as he comes down, the first town that he's going to encounter, this is the northernmost town, is Dan. And Dan will fall. Here are some pictures of Dan. The big wall that was around there, and there was a huge gate. You can see the gate here. A little bit more of the gate here. Here's another shot of it. So they would have come up this way, and the gate's right here. Those big walls are seen from down here where it's lower. This is what it's up higher. In any case, they first take Dan. They will next come down here, conquering all the little cities and whatnot along the way, and eventually get to Hatzor. Hatzor is the first huge fortification that they will encounter. Here is the watchtower, the northernmost watchtower in Hatzor. It was standing on here is when someone would have seen the Assyrian army coming. They would have had to go through, whoops, that's Dan, through these gates. You see, this is the towers, and then the 6 chambers. Hatzor is one of those 6-chambered gates that Solomon built. So they would have come in this way and had to get through all the people in all these gates and get into the city. But they did that and destroyed the city. All right, we're almost done because some of this we're going to do in class. All of that happens in 732 BC. That's a date I'd like you to know. 732 BC is the beginning of the scattering of Israel. So we have Tiglath-Pileser III that comes in and conquers Dan and Hatzor, and he marches down and eventually is paid off before he can get down here to where he would get down to Samaria, which is down here. So he comes along this way, and before he can get to Samaria, they pay him off. But he deports people. This is what the Assyrians do, is when someone has been consistently rebelling, whoops, what happened there? When someone has been consistently rebelling, they deal with it by just moving the people out, and that way there's not as much of a nationalistic feeling. So he deports a whole bunch of people. This is the beginning of the scattering of Israel. This very well may be when your ancestors left Israel and haven't returned since. This is a huge thing. 732 BC, they all start to scatter. Then what happens, and we'll get into this more in depth in class, but what happens is that later there's more rebellion. After Tiglath-Pileser III is no longer ruler, and we're going to get Shalmaneser V. And we'll talk about that. But eventually they will come the same way, going through Dan and Hatzor again, not as much resistance this time. And they do come down and lay siege to Samaria and conquer it, but there's some intrigue, and Shalmaneser has to run home and make sure he's crowned king because he's there as a general. And so then they come back and have to lay siege to it again. But eventually they destroy them and carry everybody out. Everyone is deported. Again, we'll go through this a little bit in class, but everyone is deported and others are moved in. Now, the history I want you to get here, we'll go through that part more in class, but the history I want you to get here is that there are a number of people that are left here in Israel in this northern kingdom. Well, there are actually 2 points I need you to get. Here in the northern kingdom, a whole bunch of people stay, a whole bunch are left. Then they take people from other countries that have been wicked, or not wicked, but that have rebelled against them, and they deport them and bring them in here, and they intermarry and intermix. And this area then becomes known as Samaria, named after the capital, and those people become known as the Samaritans. And the Samaritans will be an important part of Israelite history from here through the end of Jesus' day, and even still today a bit. But the Samaritans are this intermixed group of Israelites and non-Israelites. They often think of themselves as Israelites, and this will cause some conflict later, as we will see. All right, so I'm shrinking the map just a little and moving it up just a little bit so that you can get this next point. One of the things that happens as we have all of these deportations from the north is that people flee to the south. And the kingdom of Judah will soon be covered by people from the northern kingdom. In fact, they may even outnumber them eventually. That certainly happens in Jerusalem, where during this time period, the city of Jerusalem, from 730 to 720, so as we have these invasions going on, the city of Jerusalem grows from about 8,000 people to about 30,000 people. These are all refugees from the northern kingdom. This is probably when Lehi's family comes down. He's from the tribe of Manasseh, but his family will live in Jerusalem. So under the reign of Hezekiah, a whole bunch of Israelites will come down to Jerusalem. They'll have to expand Jerusalem. We'll look at that under Hezekiah's day. But they'll expand Jerusalem, and so you have this mass immigration from the northern kingdom into the southern kingdom that ends up that there are just a whole bunch of people from every tribe in the southern kingdom. But they will now be called Yehudit, or Judahites, or Jews, regardless of what tribe they are from, because they're now in the kingdom of Judah. And so you have this stark difference between the Judahites, whatever tribe they're from, who only are marrying Israelites, and the people in the northern part, who are Samaritans, who stay there but intermarry. All right, so that sets up much of the history of what we need to understand the scattering of Israel. Our own history, this is your own family history. You were part of the scattered group, your ancestors were, and that will define much of the history for the rest of the Bible and our discussions.